In this lesson, you're going to learn how to insert data into your SQL Server database. And in fact, we've created those 5 tables, and so we're going to go ahead and insert sample data into all of those tables. Not much, not a ton, just a few records each. So we're not going to have to do a whole lot of work, but enough that we can see the relationships happen between the different tables. So I have SQL Server Manager Studio open here, and I've got my 5 tables. Now, there's a couple ways I can go about inserting data into the tables. Let's start with the easy tables. See, if you start with location, remember, let's look at design here. The location asks for customer ID. Well, we don't have any customers yet, so we couldn't put stuff in the location table yet. So let's start with an easier table, one that doesn't have dependencies on other tables. Let's start with the employees table. And then we'll add to customers and jobs and then locations as well. And finally, we'll look at entering a few entries in the work done table. So first, employees. Right click on the table. We can say edit top 200 rows. Now, this is my favorite way of quickly entering information into a table. Now, just like our select top 1000 rows, it only shows us a limited number of records. It only shows us the top 200. The reason why is because we're in this edit mode, which allows us to go into any row and change the values. That's more resource intensive, so we wouldn't even want to have 1,000 records on the screen. We only want a maximum of 200. So the only way it's going to trip you up is if your table has more than 200 rows, it's only going to show the first 200. That could be confusing, especially if you add a new row, because once you refresh, that row seems to disappear. So that would be a little bit concerning. And I've actually had that happen a couple times to me where I'm thinking, I knew I entered this data, but it's gone. But if you then just do a select top 1000, you'll see it again. So just note that could be a little bit of a pitfall. Now we have all of our columns here. Notice, if you can tell, the text for ID says null, and the first name says null. This is the new record, our new row. It's not actually in the database yet. So why is it that this is a little bit different color than this one is? The reason why is because this is our auto-incrementing ID field. Therefore, it's not something we can update manually. We don't put a 1, 2, 3, 4 in there. We allow SQL to do that for us. So don't even put anything in that field. But for first name, let's put Tim, last name Corey. Email is tim@corey.com. That's not my email address. Pay rate, let's go with a cool $100 per hour. The bill rate, I'm going to leave that null for now so you can see that the default value works. And again, create date and last update date we don't touch when we're inserting data. So now how do I get this row in the table? Is it already there? It seems to be, because it has this entry here and we have a new entry down here with null. But really, since this has this little icon, it's really hard to see, but it's little ... pencil icon, or the ellipsis in the pencil. So that icon indicates that this record is being currently worked on. In this case, inserted. And it has these red exclamation points next to each one here, just indicating something has changed there. So with that being said, changed and not committed. I'm sorry. It's not only changed, but changed and not yet put in the database. So now, how do I change this? There's 2 ways. 1, you can click on the next row down, or 2, you can run this. And that's either by hitting F5 or all the way over here on the right, there's this Execute SQL button. And it's that green play button. So let's click down the next row. Notice it kind of grays it out, and it still has this red icon here, and it says the row is successfully committed to the database. However, we haven't got the information back yet. As in, this still says null for the ID, but that's not really what the ID is. So let's refresh this by using our green play button here, the execute SQL. So I'll run this, and now it all changes. So now I have an ID of 1. Notice my bill rate is 150. My create date and last update date have been entered as well. Let's add a couple more. Let's add Joe Smith, Joey at world.net. Pay rate is 125. The bill rate is 175. He's a bigwig. And we'll leave the create date and last updated date alone. We will run that. And again, we have 2 for Joe. So that's good. Now, what if we put bad information in? What if we put Jones, but no first name? All right, so let's just put his hourly rate at 90. We'll leave his bill rate alone. And we go off the record, and it says, nope, the data in row 3 was not committed because in the timesheets.dbo.employees column does not allow nulls. Now notice that naming structure. That's the database, the owner, which we haven't dealt with much, but I've told you just leave DBO alone and just go with it until you're ready to have a good reason not to go with it. So by default, everything we do is going to have an owner of DBO. So we have the database dot the owner dot the table name, and then it says the first name column in that table does not allow nulls. All right. Now we could correct the errors and retry or press escape. Let's press escape. And if we can get to it, it says nope. And that usually allows it to change, but evidently we've got there we go. Now it's working. That's a little bug there. I'm not quite sure why that was not allowing me to escape. But I just moved around a different field and allowed it. So now I've gotten rid of that record. Let's add a different one instead. Sue Storm, Sue at stormy.net, and her pay rate is 150. Her bill rate is 225, and the create date and last update date we can leave alone. And now I'll refresh this, and notice that Sue Storm, And note, we only have a few entries here. Company name, phone number, and email address, and they're all character fields. So this is a great time to show you how to insert in a different way. So I'm going to open a new query window. Now, the first thing I always do is add those empty lines just to make it easier to click around. And then also I check to make sure that my database is properly selected in the left here. Now, if you're currently in a database and you have something inside that database, including the database itself, highlighted, and you say new query, it's almost always the case that you'll see that that database is selected in the new query window when you create it. Now I can move off to a different database if I want to. For example, if I went to master now, notice that I come back here, it still says timesheets. This is a timesheets tab now, unless I were to change it. And I could change it to something else like master, but I'm not going to. I want to use I want to use timesheets. And so just make sure, double check that that's what's selected. When you only have one custom table, it's usually not a problem, but there are times when you forget and you're up here and you say new query and you go to do something and it's actually in the master database instead of timesheets. And that'd be a problem. So just make sure it's in timesheets. So our customer table, I want to use a script to insert data. And scripts are really powerful. So what do I want to do? I want to insert into dbo.customers. All right. Now it's going to yell at me because I haven't refreshed, so I'll do that now. The Control-Shift-R. So insert into dbo.customers. Now, I have to specify which columns because, especially if you allow nulls, you can say I only want to insert in certain columns. So let's specify the columns. Which columns are there? Well, we can actually cheat a little bit and open up a designer and say, okay, company name, phone number, and email address. And you can get plugins that give you some IntelliSense here so you can see this list automatically. And that's really great. I'm not going to use plugins here because I want to show you the environment you get for free out of the box. I don't have to worry about setting other things up as well. That's a discussion for another day. I definitely approve of plugins, but I don't approve of making you install 30 things in order to do my demos. So with that being said, I have no IntelliSense right now. So not a problem. Company name, phone number, and email address. There's some IntelliSense. All right. So I'm saying I want to insert into the DBO customers table. That's just the database owner dot the table name. So you could take it off right here. And what will happen is by default, it assumes DBO because that's your schema. So it would assume it. I prefer not to have it assume. So insert into dbo.customers, and then here are the columns: company name, phone number, and email address. So what do you want to insert? We want to put in some values. So values, and then what values do we want to put in? Well, the first one is the company name. XYZ Corp. Notice a single quotes around strings. Phone number is 555-1212. Note there's no area code or country code. I'm just using that as a sample. It's not doing any kind of validation here. Then email address is hr@xyz.org. All right. And now, if we were to run this, and my semicolon at the end for completeness. If we were to run this right now, it says one row affected. Let's look at the customers table, right click on it, select top 1000 rows. And we see we have XYZ Corp, phone number of 555-1212. The email address is hr@xyz.org. and then it has a create date and last updated date, and also the ID, all have been auto-created. So that was pretty quick and pretty simple to do. It was just saying, where do you want to insert the data? This table. Okay, which columns in which order, and then which values in the same order. So this value here, the XYZ Corp, goes into the first column, company name, comma separated. This next value goes into the second column. Again, both of them are comma separated. This third value here goes into this third column. Now, if I failed to include one entry, so for example, if I were to say, let's take away the email address. Remember, email is required. And I said, okay, run that. It says, cannot insert the value null into column email address. Insert fails. So it knows, nope, I can't do that, and it won't. So you have to make sure that you include all the necessary fields and then all the values that match up. But you say, what if I have more than one entry at a time? It seems pretty tedious to do one at a time. I'm glad you asked. Let me show you how to do multiple. Acme Inc. Let's just change this to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll do bugs at acme.org. All right. We say, but wait, we have more? No problem. So instead of the semicolon, we'll put a comma, open our paren, and then put something else. Let's put the ABC Incorporated, and then 555-7890, and CEO at abc.net. All right, and semicolon there. So you see that I can enter two records by just comma separating the actual values. So this is one row, this is one row. Again, comma separated. The semicolon goes to the very end, and before you put any values, you have to have this value statement saying, I'm going to give you values. So if we run this, notice my default here is to highlight whatever I want to run. With only one statement in here, I don't need to do that. I could just helpful. All right, so I'll close these out. So now I have customers, I have employees, so let's add jobs. And I'll do it the edit top 200 way. And I'll say job name is create timesheet software. For customer ID, which customer is it? Well, let's look them up. Let's do this for Acme Inc., which is number 3. And then I will create another job, which is to building. It's real creative, I guess, but that's okay. And I'm going to say that is for ABC Incorporated, which is number 4. And then I'll also create another job, which is to mow lawn. It's a really simple job, but that's okay. Also for Acme. So really quickly, I add 3 records, and I just hit the run now, and all 3 are updated. So that's all set and good. So now, locations. Let's add the top 200. And I say street address is 123 West Street in, I don't know, Scranton, PA. And that I believe is something like 18512. That might actually be right. So customer ID, let's make that customer 3. That'd be Acme. And then we've got 101 Main Ave, and that is in Washington. And I'll put that as the District of Columbia. And I have no clue what that zip code is. Let's give it a guess there. We'll put that as customer number 4. Notice I haven't created anything for customer number 1, which is XYZ Corp. I'm just doing this way because that way I have a couple for one and maybe one for the other and none for the third. That just way I just have good tests to make sure that all of my queries work the way I want it to later on. And we may add more records if we find it's necessary, but for now, I think this will be good just to give us some variety here. So let's add one more location. We'll add it to our job location number. Let's add to Acme, so number 3. So let's say we are at 19 West Holly Street in Du Bois. And we'll say we're in, I don't know, Du Bois, Texas. 66598. And that's for Acme. All right, so now I have 3 addresses. So again, just entering it through the front end. And then finally the work done. And this one's a little more tricky because I've got, the work done has all of these different entries. The employee ID, the job ID, the location ID. So I want to have all that data kind of up on the screen at the same time. So let's do this. Well, first of all, before I get there, I just want to show you one thing real quick. If I have all these windows open, so I have these 3 windows open right now. I could close them all one by one, which I just did because I only had a couple open. But I could also right-click on a tab and say close all documents, or close all but this, which allows me to close the other ones. So that just makes it easy to quickly get rid of your tabs. So now I create a new query window, and I'm going to say, let's first create my insert statement for work done. So let's look at the design for this, and I say, well, I want to see the design and see my query window at the same time. How do I do that? Well, we can split these windows into vertical tab groups. And now I have my work done on one side. I can even resize the differences in these sizes. Work done on one side and my query on the other side. That's cool. So I can come up here and I can say insert into. Oh, one more thing. This right here, capitalization does not matter. Some people love to see the caps only version like that. Other people like to see more of a what you call standard maybe casing where every first letter is capitalized. I prefer to see the all lowercase. That's just a preference. Which you prefer, it's up to you. It's not really a huge deal. If you go to a company and they insist on one way, that's fine. If you go to a company and they don't insist, but you see that everyone does a certain way, follow along. It's better to fit in, match a style that's already existing than it is to try and rock the boat and just make everyone miserable. So that's just something to note. It's all a preference thing. It's not something that's set in stone or makes a difference. Okay, so insert into dbo.workdone. One more thing to note. I could say insert into timesheets.dbo.workdone. That's actually more precise. Database, owner, table. But with that precision, I do lose something. And that is, if I give this script to anyone else, their database name must be timesheets. That's not always the case. For example, you might have a database that's called dev. Okay, so your database is called Acme Dev, and you work for the company Acme, and this is your main database, Acme Dev, that you work on locally to try out new things and to make some changes. But then in production, it's not called Acme Dev, it's called Acme Prod. Well, all of your scripts, if they're written acmedev.dbo.workdone, that'd be a problem. They'd break because there is no Acme Dev database on the production server. Which is why, if we take it off, it assumes the database you're currently in, timesheets. Therefore, if we're on production and we open this up against the Acme Prod database, and we run this, it will assume the Acme Prod database, which happens to have, or doesn't just happen, it is going to have the same tables as the Acme Dev database. The same database, just different names depending on where they are locationally or what they're used for. So that's why you don't put the database name as well, or at least why I don't. So back off that rabbit trail and back onto inserting into dbo.workdone. Employee ID, job ID, location ID, hours worked, description, and date performed. That's a lot. But now I know all the columns I need. I can do that. Now I need to have some information in those columns, so I'm actually going to close this out. And then down here, I'm going to say select star from customers. Actually, dbo.customers. Oh, it's not customers. dbo.employees. Select star from dbo.jobs. And select star from dbo.locations. Now, what does the select star from do? Well, what this select star from does, and we'll get into this more in the next lesson, but this is a lookup for our table. It says, give me every record from the employees table. And give me every column as well. Now, if we want to match what this does, see it says select top 1,000 rows, we'd have to say select top 1,000 star. But we'll get into more of that in the next lesson. For now, we don't need to do that because we only have about 3 records per table. So that's not a problem. But now if I highlight these 3 only and execute, down at the bottom, I have the results from each of these queries. And I have the IDs that I need to insert into my work done table. It just makes life easier. So now I can say, well, the employee I want is number 1, that's Tim Corey. The job I want is, let's build software. So again, 1. Spacing is not important here. You can put a space or not put a space. It's up to you. It reads better if you put a space. Okay, location ID. Let's say I'm working in Scranton. That's close to where I live. Hours worked. Let's say I worked for 7 hours. remember that the hours is an integer. It's a whole number. I did not elect to do a float, which would allow 7.5. All right. Also note that because these are numbers, they're not surrounded with those single quotes. All right. Description. Single quotes here because it is a string. I created most of the backend database to support the timesheets app. That's probably more in-depth than I need to do for a demo, but that's okay. And then we have date performed. All right, the way we can do that is by simply putting quotes around it. Let's go ahead and just put quotes, and we'll say that this work was done on 1/15/2017. All right, and that will insert one record into our table. Let's add a couple more. So let's take off that semicolon and instead put a comma. I'm actually going to copy this entire row, and the reason why is because it's just a little easier to then change it than it is to make a whole new row. So instead of Tim, let's do Tim again, but this time I still work on the same job, but I worked for 3 hours, and I changed locations for whatever reason. And so I changed to location number 3, which is that West Holly Street in Du Bois, Texas, because I wanted some more sun, some more heat. And here I'll say that I built the Angular front end. And I did that on the 18th. And then down here we're going to say, instead of Tim, we'll say that Sue, who's ID number 7, and make sure you get the alignment right, which column is which. So job ID is, you know what? Sue worked on the building, and so let's do 2 for that. That's right here. It's 2. And then location, well, there's only one location. That's at Main Street in Washington, D.C., so that's also a 2. And Sue put in some hours. She put in 9 hours. I built the first floor. Easy to know, Sue. She's a hard worker. Let's set her at January 8th as the time she did the work. Okay, so that's it. Now I highlight just these, and I'll insert these 3 records into the work done table. If we look at the work done table now, either by saying select top 1,000 rows or by doing a select star from, let's do the top 1,000 rows, and there we go. There's our 3 entries. And that's really all there is to inserting data. It's not that hard, especially with some of these editors like the edit top 200 and just type it in. But even the scripting of it, really not that hard. Just saying insert into where, which columns, and then the values, and matching up the values to their given columns. That's it. So if you're not comfortable with that syntax yet, I'd recommend just create a simple template, kind of strip it down, and maybe put things in brackets or something like that, like table name, and then column, comma, etc, and then values, and do the same thing. Where you say something like value, comma, etc. So you just have a snippet right here and just kind of save this somewhere so you can look at it. So you say, okay, I need to create an insert statement. So I say insert into, okay, got that. Table name, what's my table name? Okay, I'll put that in there. Which columns? Comma separated. So I'll put my columns in. Values, oh, I match the values up to columns, I'm good to go. A little template like that can sometimes help just to keep all of your syntax straight. And so there's some more complex ones you'll see down the road where you might want to do that as well, but that might be helpful. Okay, so that's all there is for inserting data into the tables. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to actually access that data and kind of link it up together and see how that all works. So we'll look at that in the next video.